We are back with another episode. The one where we finally find the rabbits down this rabbit hole, and of course, another of the dead women with them.
Dead Women and Rabbits, my favorite.
It's not Alice in Wonderland, if that's what you were wondering.
No, I had begun to suspect, although I hear tell it is a blonde of some sort.
Yes, we have Emmeline de Lençon, who is born Emily or Emmeline Andre. I have biographies who differ on what her name originally was in terms of first name, so one of them. But she is born in Paris in 1870 to a mother who worked as the custodian of the building they lived in. Her father never had any intention of marrying her mother.
Was that a bad thing? Like was that a mutual decision, or was he kind of taking advantage of her?
I think her mother, especially at this point in time, would have expected to get married.
So he was
Considering the
just being
whole
an asshole.
yeah, considering the whole stigma against unread mothers. She also has at least two brothers, though they're not named in any biography I've come across.
Is it the same father for those as well? Or do we know?
I would assume so, because it sounds like her father hung around long enough to have had multiple children.
I'm not liking this guy a whole lot, based on what I know.
Yes, and they also don't live in the best area of Paris. The apartment was rather close to the Notre Dame de Lorette, which is where the Lorette level of the demi-monde comes from, as we discussed in Valtesse de la Vigne's episode.
Could you remind me what they are?
So there are varying levels of prostitution in the demi-monde, in the half-world. For instance, on the lower end, we have a grisette who is poor and lives a modest existence, but is a step above what is considered to be the common prostitute. So, like, a streetwalker is below her, and she'll go to, like, dances and cafes, but she is below a Lorette, who takes her name from Notre Dame de Lorette. And the Lorette is different from the grisette because the grisette only supplements her income with prostitution. The Lorette is trying to become a courtesan, so she's usually a kept woman, but not in the same style or level of grandeur as a courtesan.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, for Emmeline de Lençon, we don't actually know much about her childhood. What little we do know is that at 15, her mother goes and gets back together with her father, and this time they plan to marry. So she
Do
goes.
they actually?
They do. They do actually get married this time.
Well, good on him, I guess.
So she's now spending more time with her father, who owns a cafe in Ville-sur-Mer in Normandy. It actually moves the family and herself from Paris to Normandy, which she apparently doesn't like very much.
Do we know anything about, like, her connection to her home? I mean, did she know any of the Lorettes? Did she have friends there?
As I said, we don't know much, though I would assume she does still have friends in Paris, as by the time she leaves Normandy and goes back there, she's eager for the nightlife sort of city vibe, and I would assume her friends, though she doesn't stay with any of them.
A woman of mystery.
What we do know is during her time in Normandy, she has a daughter at 17. No one seems to know who the father is.
Ooh. Wow.
And then Emmeline refuses to acknowledge her daughter's existence for 17 years.
That sounds like a very intense event in her life. Do we have any documentation of how she was feeling about this? Does she write any letters? Does she have any diaries about it?
So there weren't any diary entries really listed in the biographies. We do know they sort of reconcile later. We also know that she does keep pictures of her kid and that at some point she's involved with her daughter's education and paying for it as well.
So she cares for this child to some degree. It's just she doesn't want to be associated with this child, which applies some sort of traumatic thing, but who knows, I guess.
Yes, but this also is somewhat of a theme with courtesans and their children.
I mean, as we've said before, that it's as with pop stars now, you can't be seen to be taken, and certainly not to have children.
However, she stays in Normandy for another few years after that, because she's not of age yet. As soon as she is 21, she leaves, wanting to get away from her mother. She goes back to Paris and moves in with a Roma violinist she met at a cabaret.
Are they, like, together? Are they a thing?
I would assume so.
Do we know anything about this relationship aside from the bare bones here?
No. We know a lot of people she was involved with, but they're usually just a list of names.
Wow. You gotta wonder, like, if you talk to her, would it be like that, or would she have, would she tell you more, or is it just the sheer number of people that when biographers go back over her, they're like, yeah, there's that one, there's that one?
I think she would probably tell a couple of anecdotes if you were close enough for her to talk about that, but for biographers, it's probably just too many people have to get this across somehow. List all the names.
It's a shame because I feel like it takes away from the humanity of what she's experiencing here. I mean, here she is, vulnerable and alone and finds a friend away from home, but actually also kind of at home, the home that she had before.
And then she decides to be an actress, though she knows she will not be the next Sarah Bernhardt, and she doesn't have the ambition to be one either.
So is this, as we had said before, acting as kind of advertising? Like, does she have the idea to be a courtesan or something like it at this time?
Probably because she does end up mingling in the same circles, but she's not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, she gets a job in the circus.
Ooh, doing what?
It is here we have the rabbits. Imagine in a dimly lit room, you see these fluffy, dyed pink with ruffled collars rabbits come tumbling out behind this woman onto the stage while she directs them to jump over candles, ride a seesaw, and fire a miniature gun. All while dressed in a costume bordered on indecent.
Ooh, scandalous. Do we have any descriptions of what her costume looked like?
No, only that it was bordering on indecent. So,
man, this woman's story has no details.
Judging from some of the photos I've seen of her, I imagine it showed a great deal of leg, which at the time would have been scandalous.
Right. So were these, like, her rabbits? Like, were they her pets and friends?
No, they belonged to the circus.
I see. She was merely the trainer.
Yes, though she only joined the circus after her attempts at getting directors to cast her in plays failed.
I see. So, backup job. Ah, yes. I will be the rabbit lady.
The Rabbit Tamer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like many, she does change her name along the way. Another courtesan gave her her new name, Émilienne d'Alençon, in a champagne baptismal.
Ah, so she has become a courtesan now?
Not quite. She is getting there.
And but she gets the baptism of one.
The only champagne baptismal for courtesans I've heard of, but truly, if all baptisms involve champagne, I'm convinced the Catholic Church might actually get some converts.
I mean, they already have wine and they have baptisms, so.
Baptize them in the wine. We can also note that Alençon is the name of a place in Normandy, so her name can literally mean Émilienne of Alençon, though it's not mentioned if she was ever in this town.
It sounds nice, it rolls off the tongue, so.
And it sounds aristocratic enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's off to the Folies Bergère and finally gets some actual acting jobs, even appears in Beauty and the Beast there. She also at some point becomes acquainted with and hangs out with La Belle Otero, who's a bit of a mentor, it sounds like.
Now, when we say hangs out with and a bit of a mentor, do we mean anything by that?
This is not the sort of relationship that Leanne de Pougy had with Belteste de Lavinia. We'll put it that way.
Fair enough.
Now, Emmeline does soon catch the eye of the young Duke Jacques d'Uzès. Naturally, he moves in the moneyed circles that aspiring courtesans need, and these circles of his also happen to include a pretender to the French throne.
Interesting.
So she's moving up in the world. They travel around France and to England until the Duke leaves London for New York, at which point she returns to Paris and makes headlines in her performance career, probably due to a combination of both scandalous affairs and scandalous outfits.
And not necessarily about acting.
Correct, we are advertising more than anything after all.
Mm-hmm.
Jacques returns to Paris a few months later. Now, like many at the time, he had the idea of saving Emmeline from being a courtesan and also from the circus. So he began a campaign to this effect, and this required a lot of money. He rents a place on the Champs-Élysées and has liveried servants and a new car. The automobile actually is only just in its commercial infancy. So it's like,
it already has it.
Yeah, it's like the brand new thing. Imagine when Teslas first came out and someone, just jumped on the first one.
Mm-hmm.
In 1891 alone, he spends 1,900,000 francs.
Ooh. Do we have any sense of what that would be in today money?
Somewhere north of 2 million.
A lot of money. He gave her a lot of money. Now, important question here. Does she want to be saved?
I highly doubt it, because unfortunately for him, Emmeline was quite the opportunist, helped along by lessons from Otero. Otero, it should be noted, is the woman who, in conversation with Colette, talked about a retirement of a mansion and a pool boy.
Mm-hmm.
It should also be noted that while Emmeline looked like a silly, adorable blonde, she wasn't, and it was a misconception she delighted in.
So she's kind of got that Marilyn vibe going on, where, people see her and they think she's very ditzy, and that kind of allows her to get her way.
Yes, but as we saw with Leanne de Pougy's episode, Emmeline could be quite vicious, yet always forgiven for it somehow.
Well, she's pretty.
In Leanne de Pougy's case, that's probably the line of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jacques' mother was not an idiot by any means. She tries to remove him from this predicament by having him accompany her for 2 months through Italy, Austria, Greece, and Turkey, which is then part of the Ottoman Empire.
And so does this distraction do anything for him?
Not a single thing. Even more disastrous are the rumors that Emmeline's pregnant.
Is she?
It doesn't appear to be the case in reality.
But it certainly implies that they have an attachment that's not going to be so easily broken.
Correct. Now, the affair does end, though, and Jacques dies soon after in 1893 while on an expedition to Africa, one his mother actually encouraged him to take to the Congo.
Is this yet another attempt to get him away from her, or?
I suspect it was both an attempt to get him away from Emmeline as well as just a go find yourself and what to do with your life. Go be productive. Go do something.
Right, and I guess away from all the gossips too, probably.
And all the other women.
Mm-hmm.
By now, everyone knew about Emmeline, and her debut, so to speak, was complete. Plus, she had a new apartment courtesy of a baron. She also develops a friendship with Beltesse de la Vigne, though not as close a one as Leanne de Pougy would have with her.
Still, she is much more of a courtesan than she was before this relationship. Ironic, because he's trying so hard to get her to stop.
In the meantime, her parents get divorced.
Oof, well, good that they can.
Her father goes off somewhere, but her mother stays hanging around her until she dies in 1903.
Do we know how this affects her reputation? Do the the people, her clients, I guess, feel kind of weird about her mother just kind of being there, or?
I suspect Émilienne sort of shunts her mother off into some other area most of the time, but does sort of talk to her and visit her and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. But it's good that she can have that family connection, despite her kind of celebrity life generally.
Now, there are also rumors of an affair with Valtess, but as we saw in her episode, nothing like that is certain.
Mm-hmm. At this point, do we have any sense of her being sapphic in any way?
Yes, because while Valtess did like to create mystery around her, the same could not be said for Leanne de Bougie.
I see.
The two had such a public affair that the gossip columns announced they would soon be expecting a child.
They were close.
This is not to say it was drama-free, though. Émilienne did set Leanne up to fail in the eyes of the public with its ongoing Who's Dressed More Fabulous contest between courtesans, and then snubbed her all evening only to hop back into her bed within a week.
Wow. So I'm going to need a more in-depth, because I know we told that story before with Leanne, but just a little recap.
So, Valtess was not amused that her mentee was off in a liaison that was not productive. Émilienne, I imagine, was just having fun, as was Leanne, but neither of the two were discreet.
Girls just want to have fun after all.
Yes. And as Leanne would write, Émilienne was very pretty, tip-tilted nose that was adorable, the ditzy blonde look, but did snub her all evening, but then was installed in her carriage, in her theater box, and in Leanne's bed, all to Leanne's great pleasure.
Some people.
Yes, the ability, it seems, to get away with anything.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at some point, the affair runs its course, and it does end, though being 2/3 of the top 3 courtesans of the era, they do run into each other quite frequently and tend to share clients.
Interesting. Does this become a problem with them, or are they chill about it?
They seem to be pretty chill. Both Leanne and Émilienne, as well as La Belle Otero, all seem to have had Prince Bertie, the future King of England, at some point or another.
Interesting.
And speaking of royals, we have King Leopold II of Belgium show up.
Not the best of those ones.
Yes, 60 years old and colonizing the Congo with atrocities along the way. He visits Paris.
And boy, is he a catch.
Yes, well, like many rulers in Paris, he takes up with courtesans, including La Belle Otero and Émilienne. At the time, it said Émilienne was playing Prince Charming in a ballet pantomime and was 26. A woman playing a man apparently intrigued the Belgian king, so he goes to the performance and then meets her backstage. The affair goes from there.
Do we know how she feels about this? Is there some sort of code of ethics or something about when your client has done atrocities?
I don't think she cared as much. Émilienne strikes me as less interested in politics and serious study than, say, Valtess, who helped France colonize places.
Right. Yeah, that is a fair point. Yeah, there's a lot of these women seem to be fine with ignoring things like that.
Of course, things can't be as easy as have public affair, get paid, then leave. During this time, there was press gossip about her marrying a unicyclist.
What? So was unicyclist a job? Was it just a guy who really liked to unicycle? Did he work at the circus?
I suspect it was someone who works at a circus.
Got it. So back to her roots. Now, do we know anything about this relationship? Did it exist?
I don't think it actually exists because it appears that this marriage never took place, but it caused an outcry. Like all celebrity gossip, sides were taken. Some people verbally attacked Leopold II during this time, and it actually makes him try to protect his reputation by leaving Émilienne.
This is Leopold II. I don't think that he has much of a good reputation, but I don't know, maybe that's just me.
Different times, I don't think many people knew or cared about Congo atrocities.
Wild. Anyway.
Basically, the whole thing blows up and out of proportions and seems to end the affair as the Belgian king moves on to an infatuation with Cleo de Merode, a dancer and probably not a courtesan.
Right, because you just can't take up with women like that. They might be with unicyclists and you'd never know.
However, some speculate this rumor about de Merode was to cover up the affair with d'Alençon, as he might have never even met the dancer.
Wow! This truly is, like, the layers of fiction in this one.
And we still have decades to go.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from her various affairs causing scandals, she had other methods with which to make headlines. When bicycling became a craze among Parisian women, she joined in. Though we laugh today, it was very scandalous at the time.
Oh yeah, very women on bicycles. Scandal.
All those skirts bouncing and legs showing while pedaling.
I mean, practically a public sex act.
The elderly were clutching their pearls and gasping in horror.
I'm sure they were. So versus unicycling, now it's bicycling. What next?
It appears La Belle Otero and Leanne Depuchy did not join in, so bicycling became part of her image alone.
Ooh, I love the branding. Bicycle girl. Edgy.
Yes, well, during all of this, she also doesn't give up women and continues running in sapphic circles.
So she's buying more than just the cycles.
At some point, she actually takes to wearing a monocle and goes round to the gay bars.
So, I don't know if we've talked about monocles before.
No, because no one we've done has really worn monocles.
Now, what does this mean? Because it's not like she's suddenly become a fusty old British man.
No, she has not.
So what was the cultural significance?
A lot of lesbians at the time, some of the most famous examples being Radcliffe Hall and Una Lady Trowbridge, would dress more masculinely, sort of tailored suits on the top, and monocles was a part of this. It was a sort of code.
So you see a lady and you see her monocle and you're like, kind of a gay ear situation.
Sort of. And here is some more listing, because there were apparently various affairs with duchesses and musicians, and quite possibly the Baroness Helen van Zuylen van Dieplet, the woman Renee Vivian left Natalie Barney for.
Ooh.
Not entirely sure about this woman, because she's only referenced as Baroness van Z.
So it could be anyone, it's just how many Baroness van Z's are there?
Running in sapphic circles, I know of only one.
Yeah, wow.
Of course, she also then goes on to have her own affair with the poet Renee Vivian.
Because what's more sapphic than dating your ex's ex?
Of course, especially when she failed to capture Natalie Barney's interest at the ice rink.
Oh, tragic.
Yes, apparently Renee somehow managed to carry her up a flight of stairs, which I find hard to believe solely because of how the poet abused her own body with drugs, alcohol, and eating disorders before she died.
Yeah. I mean, maybe she was, like, really small, easily carried?
Possibly. Renee Vivian was quite tall.
Yeah, well, and, I mean, sometimes she's pretty and ditzy and blonde, and you just kind of...
Away from these affairs, there's others, including Etienne Balzon, a former cavalry officer turned polo player.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't particularly surprising considering Emmeline did have a fondness for all things horse racing related and the men involved.
Oh. Why have we not heard this before? Is it just because of all the other people she's been having affairs with?
I do believe polo and horse racing take a back seat to the Belgian king.
Fair point.
Though in the case of Balzan, Emmeline would be replaced by Coco Chanel.
Ugh. Wow.
However, she does go on to marry a jockey, Percy Woodland, from England.
Wow, marrying a person.
Shocking, I know.
Right. Is this... A, where does this come from? And B, how can this last?
Well, it doesn't last, and it came from horse racing.
She just got so into the horses that she forgot about being a courtesan and having her own freedom.
She apparently still keeps her freedom because she goes on and meets George Alexander Carter, better known as Alec, another jockey.
Wow, she is a type.
She does, and in her eyes, Alec was better, so she took up with him instead.
Fair enough. So, we've been hearing a lot about her relationships. Do we get any sense of her being part of arts and culture during this time?
She is, because she does go through the salons, even Natalie Barney's, and she also takes up poetry.
Mm-hmm. Is she any good?
Middling.
Fair enough.
It's also still possible to find some of it, like Sous le Masque. She is also still occasionally performing, even in 1914 before the outbreak of World War I. She loses Alec Carter in the opening weeks of the conflict, though his death isn't officially announced until November.
Oof. So what does she do then?
She doesn't seem to have changed much, as high society doesn't really change once the initial months of the war end. Though she is getting old, and she's begun, like many of the middle-aged and old people, muttering about what she finds distasteful in the current young generation.
Ooh, like what?
She would say things about, oh, it's such a pity. At that age, I was worrying about my pearls.
As opposed to what?
Well, for instance, ma'am, there is a war on.
Yeah, minor things to be concerned about. So, wait, she's concerned that people are being more political than they were before?
It would appear so, because as an actress, she doesn't really talk about anything of much substance, and everyone else has started to.
I see. Well, I feel like she's maybe ended up on the wrong side of history with that one, but then on the right side of PR to some degree, because you do all the time hear about actors and actresses winding up in trouble when they say things that are not correct. Controversies over that, and I guess also especially if we look at like things that Natalie Barney said, for instance. Sometimes it's better if people just don't say anything.
Keep your opinions to yourself.
Mm-hmm. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all.
Of course, it seems like either her still husband or by now ex-husband, Percy Woodland, he also joins up, though he joins the English Air Service, and he actually is the one who survives the war.
Are they still married?
Possibly. I didn't see mention of a divorce.
All right, a woman of mystery.
And then she finds opium.
Does she have is she self-medicating here? Is she helping with the problem? Is it just for fun?
Nobody decided to mention that, so considering the circle she runs in, it could have started as fun. It could also have been because she lost Carter. Either way, she gets addicted.
Rough. Do we know anything about that time? I mean, is she seeking help at all?
Nope. She's not seeking help. She never kicks the habit, in fact.
Wow. Poor woman. That's a rough addiction to have.
By October 1918, she's living in an apartment on Avenue Victor Hugo in Paris. Her daughter is now 30. Their relationship is still not the best.
Really? Abandoned her for, what was it, 17 years?
Yeah. And it it doesn't seem like they live together at any point.
I could see where there would be some hurt feelings, some estrangement.
Yes, though she writes poems about her daughter.
Sounds like a case of too little too late.
Yeah. She also isn't giving up her lifestyle, despite getting older.
How old is she now?
She is 48.
So she's not that old, but definitely old in, like, courtesan terms.
So the opium is starting to leave its mark, physically. It's deteriorating her looks.
Mm-hmm. So is she still able to be a courtesan? I mean, is she still picking up guys?
No, she's no longer a courtesan, though she still goes out on the town with gigolos following her.
I see. So she's kept in the cultural zone, but now she is a client.
Yes, now she's the one with money.
Mm-hmm. Is she still acting?
It doesn't sound like it. It sounds like she's completely retired from everything.
Mm-hmm.
However, she hasn't retired from sapphism.
No, nor will any of us, God forbid.
Because Mimi Franchetti shows up.
Mm-hmm.
As we know from all the other episodes she's popped up in, after her love triangle with Leanne DePougy and Natalie Barney falls apart, Mimi ends up with Émilienne.
What is this like? Do we have any documentation of their relationship or how they experienced that?
I imagine Émilienne writes more poetry.
But you don't have access to that?
No, I don't, and her biographer saw fit to skip through.
Onto the list of names, I guess.
It's a bit more than a list of names in this case. It does actually say, like, 5 sentences.
Mm-hmm.
However, like all of the dead women, or most of them anyway, World War II shows up. There is a bit of a resurgent interest in her. There's a journalist who takes interest in her for her story, but that's not enough of a bright spot during the German occupation. She doesn't flee. She actually instead moves back to the neighborhood she spent her childhood in.
What's that like? Is she, like, taking shelter? Does she see any violence near her?
Technically, the war is all around when your country's being occupied.
Right, but I mean, I've heard that people go into the countryside to be kind of away from major cities which would be attacked.
I doubt it, because she doesn't leave the city.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more of wanting probably to live a bit more in the past, and being someplace that she has good memories of. Because it sounds like she never wanted to go to Normandy in the first place. She wanted to stay in Paris, and as soon as she was able, she came back.
I see.
However, this doesn't mean she doesn't still travel. Because when she dies on February 14th, 1945, at the age of 65, she's in Monaco.
Mm-hmm. What's she doing there?
Vacationing, I imagine, like she did when she was still a courtesan.
Love it. Living the high life, even when it's the middle of World War II. Or I guess, had the war ended? I don't know when the war ended exactly.
The war in Europe wouldn't end for another month or two, and then VJ Day wouldn't come until later after that, even.
So she's just taking that vacation to take that vacation. Now, at 65, is she, like, what happens? Do we know?
We know that she gets a few lines in newspapers for an obituary.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that her daughter has her buried in the family cemetery. Though ironically, when her daughter dies years later, an administrative mistake says that she has no mother.
Well, I mean, if you asked her.
Yeah, if you asked her, she didn't exactly have a mother. She had a woman who birthed her.
Right. She had a relative who coincidentally happened to have given birth to her. So there was no big funeral, there was no grand parade, there was no, several books written about her or whatever.
No, Emmeline de Lenson is the least remembered, I would say, certainly the least talked about and written about of the three top courtesans. La Belle Otero is has been talked about for decades since she died. Books came out very quickly. Leanne de Pougy has been more of a resurgence, along with Natalie Barney and their whole story. Emmeline de Lenson is much more forgotten.
Why?
I suspect in part because, for instance, Leanne de Pougy had this great big love affair with Natalie Barney, still hung out in those circles, married a prince who was related to the Queen of Romania and then died a nun.
Yeah, it is a bit extraordinary.
Yes, a very interesting story arc. La Belle Otero was seen as this wild woman who slept with all the crown heads of Europe, told all these stories about herself, wrote memoirs, was not a reliable narrator, as we'll see, but also got a movie made about herself before she died.
Wow, yeah, so that would keep her in the public consciousness for a bit.
Emmeline de Lenson, not as much going on despite poetry and still being in those circles. In terms of film, there's like a brief mentioning of her in Coco Avant Chanel.
Mm-hmm. But she's not a major player the way she was when she was alive.
Correct. She didn't make headlines when she was old or when after she died.
Mm-hmm. And I guess also, I mean, that she didn't have anyone to carry on her name. You know, she didn't have a lover who was still alive. She didn't have a daughter who she had invested in good time in. There was no one to be, you know, reviving interest in her.
Correct. Aside from the one journalist in World War II, but that it was in World War II, it doesn't make much of a impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wonder if that was more, you know, World War II, everything is grim and horrible, and this is a bright spot to hold on to. And once you remove that element, well, new things are happening. We'll let go of the old age and all of that.
It probably was.
Who can say, though, as with much of her life, it seems like everything is lost to the sands of time.
Thank you for listening. Follow us on Twitter, subscribe, and remember, if the director turns you away, join the circus and be a rabbit tamer.